Welcome to Historical Podcast, the podcast where we walk the ghost-haunted halls of history's greatest powers. Today, we embark on an epic journey, a story of 1,000 years, of a city that was the center of the world, and of an empire that refused to die. We're telling the story of the rise and fall of the Byzantine Empire. When we think of the Roman Empire, we often picture legions, Caesars, and the Colosseum. We also picture its fall, barbarians at the gates, the final emperor deposed in 476 AD. But what if I told you that was only half the story? That for another 1,000 years, the Roman Empire lived on? It spoke Greek, it prayed to an Orthodox Christian god, and its capital was not Rome, but a glittering metropolis on the Bosphorus, Constantinople. This is the story of that empire, the one history would later call Byzantium. It's a saga of immense power and profound faith, of stunning resilience and catastrophic betrayal. From the glorious domes of the Hagia Sophia to the final desperate battle on the city walls, we will trace the life, the long twilight, and the dramatic death of the Second Rome. Chapter 1. A New Rome. Our story begins not with a birth, but with a crisis. By the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire was a giant tearing itself apart. Decades of civil war, plague, and economic collapse, a period historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, had brought it to its knees. The empire was simply too vast, too unwieldy, for one man to rule from a single capital. Its sheer size had become its greatest weakness. In 286 CE, a brilliant soldier emperor named Diocletian came up with a radical solution. He decided to divide the administrative burden of Rome. He appointed a co-emperor, Maximian, and established a system called the Tetrarchy, or Rule of Four, with 2 senior emperors known as Augusti and 2 junior emperors called Caesars. This was a fundamental reorganization of government, creating the largest and most bureaucratic administration in the empire's history. Diocletian, in a move that spoke volumes about the state of the old world, chose to rule the wealthier, more stable eastern half himself, leaving the turbulent west to his co-emperor. The message was clear. The future of Roman power lay in the east. This division, initially an administrative fix, set in motion a process that would change Roman life forever. Diocletian's system, however, was built on the strength of his will. After his retirement, it predictably gave way to another brutal civil war. From that chaos, one man emerged supreme: Constantine the Great. Constantine understood what Diocletian had. The heart of the empire was no longer in Italy. The old Rome was too far from the critical frontiers on the Danube and the Euphrates, and it was plagued by political unrest. He needed a new capital, a new Rome, strategically placed at the crossroads of the world, a capital for a new kind of Roman Empire. He chose an ancient Greek city called Byzantium, a settlement with roots stretching back to the 7th century BC. In 324 AD, Constantine began his grand project. On May 11th, 330 AD, the city was formally consecrated as Constantinople, Constantine's city. Its location was a stroke of defensive and economic genius. It sat on a high peninsula on the Bosporus Strait, the narrow waterway that serves as the gateway between Europe and Asia and connects the Mediterranean and Black Seas. It was a natural fortress, surrounded by water on 3 sides, possessing a magnificent deep-water harbor known as the Golden Horn. This position was not only readily defensible, but also gave its rulers easy access to the empire's wealthiest provinces and most threatened frontiers. And Constantine spared no expense in creating his new world capital. He plundered the old pagan temples of the empire for their columns, marbles, doors, and tiles, bringing them to his city to adorn its new public works. He built a vast hippodrome for chariot races that could seat over 80,000 spectators, a new senate house, and a grand imperial palace. He laid out wide, colonnaded streets and forums designed to rival those of old Rome, even claiming the city was built on 7 hills, just like its predecessor. To populate his new metropolis, he promised gifts of land and offered free food, 80,000 rations of it, distributed from 117 points across the city every single day. This was not merely a logistical move, it was a revolutionary act. The founding of Constantinople was a deliberate break with the past. Constantine was implicitly acknowledging that the old, pagan, Latin-centric Rome was part of history. The future of the Roman Empire, he decreed, would be Eastern, Greek-speaking, and, most importantly, Christian. From its very foundation, Constantinople was conceived as the capital of a Christian Roman Empire, a city that would become the center of the world for the next millennium. Chapter 2. The Age of Justinian, Glory and Ambition. Fast forward 2 centuries. The Western Roman Empire is gone, a memory picked apart by barbarian kingdoms. The final Western emperor was deposed in 476, an event often cited as the Fall of Rome. But in the East, the Roman Empire endures, its capital at Constantinople shining ever brighter. And in 527 AD, a man of humble peasant origins ascends to the throne. His name was Justinian, and he would burn with an ambition that was nothing less than breathtaking: to reconquer the lost West and restore the Roman Empire to its former unified glory. Justinian Thorn was born Petrus Sabatius in a small village in modern-day North Macedonia. His improbable rise was thanks to his uncle, Justin, a swineherd-turned-soldier who clawed his way up the ranks to become emperor himself. Justin took his brilliant nephew under his wing, ensuring he received a classical education and military training, eventually naming him co-emperor. But Justinian did not rule alone. By his side was one of the most remarkable and powerful women in history, Empress Theodora. Theodora's origins were even lowlier than Justinian's. She was an actress, a profession considered scandalous and disreputable at the time. But her intelligence, wit, and political skill were undeniable. Justinian was so captivated by her that he had the law changed so that he could marry her. She was crowned. Augusta alongside him and became his co-ruler in all but name. Her influence was immense, her name appearing in nearly all the laws passed during the period, and she often handled duties, like receiving foreign envoys, that were typically reserved for the emperor alone. Many at the time believed it was she, not Justinian, who truly ruled Byzantium. Their extraordinary partnership was tested almost immediately. In January of 532, the city of Constantinople exploded in the Nika riots. The political factions of the Hippodrome, the Blues and the Greens, who normally channeled their rivalry into chariot races, united in a furious uprising against the throne. They crowned a rival emperor, and the city burned around the imperial palace. Justinian's advisors, terrified, begged him to flee. The empire hung by a thread. It was Theodora who saved it. In a now famous speech to the council, she refused to run, declaring that she would not live as an exile and that the royal purple is the noblest shroud. Bolstered by her steely courage, Justinian stayed. His brilliant general Belisarius gathered loyal troops, trapped the rioters in the Hippodrome, and slaughtered an estimated 30,000 of them. The rebellion was crushed. The throne was secure. From the ashes of the riots, Justinian and Theodora began to build. Their crowning achievement was a church, but a church unlike any the world had ever seen, built on the site of a cathedral destroyed in the fires. The Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom. Built in the astonishingly short time of about 5 years, from 532 to 537, it was an architectural marvel designed not by traditional builders but by 2 Greek geometers and mathematicians, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidorus of Miletus. Its defining feature was a colossal central dome, 105 feet across, that seemed to float weightlessly on a cascade of light pouring from 40 windows at its base. This was achieved through the first large-scale use of pendentives, curved triangular vaults that allowed the placement of a circular dome over a square room. For nearly 1,000 years, it would remain the largest cathedral in all of Christendom, a breathtaking symbol of Byzantine power and faith. But Justinian's most enduring legacy was not made of brick and mortar, but of words. The laws of Rome were a chaotic, contradictory mess accumulated over 1,000 years of history. Justinian commissioned a team of legal scholars to collect, edit, and organize them into a single, coherent body of work. The result was the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law, known to history as the Code of Justinian. Published in stages between 529 and 534, this comprehensive code synthesized centuries of Roman legal thought and would become the foundation for the legal systems of much of modern Europe. Theodora's influence is seen here too. She is credited with championing laws that offered new protections for women, including prohibiting sex trafficking, freeing women forced into prostitution, and granting women more rights in divorce proceedings. Justinian's reign represents the apex of Byzantine ambition, a frantic, brilliant, and ultimately unsustainable burst of energy. His reconquest of North Africa and Italy, the construction of the Hagia Sophia, and the codification of Roman law were all monumental achievements. Yet this golden age was not a period of calm prosperity, but a high-wire act of immense fragility. It succeeded only because of a unique combination of his own grand vision, Theodora's political steel, and Belisarius's military genius. It was a high-stakes gamble that stretched the empire's resources to their absolute limit, a glittering peak from which the only way was down. Chapter 3. The Fight for Survival. Justinian's dream of a restored Roman Empire was glorious, but it was fleeting. His wars of reconquest in the West and his constant battles with the Persian Empire in the East had exhausted the treasury and bled the military dry. In the century that followed his death, Byzantium would be plunged into a desperate existential struggle for its very existence. The first blow came from its oldest and most formidable rival. The Byzantine-Sasanian War of 602 to 628 was the final cataclysmic showdown between the two superpowers of the ancient world. It was a conflict of unprecedented devastation, fought across the entire Middle East. A struggle that historians have called the last great war of antiquity. For the first 2 decades, the Sasanian Persians were unstoppable. They took advantage of a military coup in Constantinople to launch their invasion, conquering Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, the wealthiest provinces of the Byzantine Empire. In 614, they captured the holy city of Jerusalem, a profound psychological blow to the Christian world. They burned churches, including the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and carried off Christendom's most sacred relic, the True Cross, to their capital, Ctesiphon. The empire was on its knees, its armies shattered, its revenues gone. But just as before, in its darkest hour, a savior emerged. The Emperor Heraclius, a brilliant military strategist, reorganized the state for total war. He launched a series of daring and unexpected campaigns, taking the fight deep into the Persian heartland. By 628, after years of brutal fighting, Byzantium was victorious. Heraclius had restored the True Cross to Jerusalem, and the Sasanian Empire had collapsed into civil war, its king overthrown. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. This war was not just another conflict. It was a form of mutual suicide for the two dominant powers of the late antique world. By bleeding each other white for over 2 decades, Byzantium and Persia had exhausted their human and material resources, creating a massive power vacuum in the Middle East. They had unwittingly set the stage perfectly for the next, unforeseen conqueror waiting in the wings. And that conqueror came with the speed of a desert storm. United by the new faith of Islam, Arab armies erupted out of the Arabian Peninsula in the 630s. The exhausted and battered Byzantine and Persian armies were no match for their speed, discipline, and religious fervor. In a whirlwind campaign that stunned the world, the forces of the Rashidun Caliphate seized Syria by 639 and conquered Egypt, the empire's breadbasket, by 642. The loss was catastrophic. North Africa soon followed. Within a single generation, the Byzantine Empire was cut down to a third of its former size, reduced to its core territories of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and the Balkans. Twice in 674 and again in 717, massive Arab armies and navies laid siege to Constantinople itself, hoping to extinguish the empire once and for all. But the city's legendary triple-layered land walls, the walls of Theodosius, held firm. In the naval battles, the Byzantines unleashed a terrifying new weapon, a flammable liquid that could burn on water, a closely guarded state secret known to history as Greek fire. The Arab fleets were annihilated, and Constantinople survived. It had become a bastion, the shield of Christian Europe against the expansion of the Caliphate. But the threats were not just from the south. In the Balkans, a new and formidable power had emerged, the Bulgarian Empire. For the next several centuries, the Byzantines and Bulgarians would be locked in a brutal seesaw struggle for control of the peninsula. This was a war of titans, filled with moments of shocking cruelty and epic reversals. The Bulgarian Khan Krum famously defeated and killed Emperor Nikephoros Dioscorides in battle in 811, supposedly turning his skull into a silver-lined drinking cup to toast his nobles. Centuries later, the Byzantine Emperor Basil II would earn the grim nickname Bulgaroktonos, the Bulgar Slayer, after his decisive victory at the Battle of Kleidion in 780-1014. According to legend, he captured 14,000 Bulgarian soldiers and had them all blinded, leaving only one man in every 100 with a single eye to lead his comrades home. The shock of seeing his blinded army is said to have killed the Bulgarian Tsar. By 1018, Basil had completely conquered Bulgaria, restoring the empire's Danube frontier for the first time in 400 years. The empire had survived, but it was a harder, smaller, and more embattled state, forever fighting for its life. Chapter 4. A Crisis of Faith. The Iconoclasm. While the empire fought for its physical survival against enemies on all sides, a war was also raging for its soul. This was a conflict not over land or treasure, but over images. The question was simple, yet it struck at the very heart of Christian belief. Should Christians create and venerate icons, holy images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the saints? Were they sacred windows to the divine, aids to prayer and worship? Or were they idols, a dangerous slide back into paganism and a direct violation of the Second Commandment's prohibition against graven images? This was the Byzantine iconoclasm, or image breaking, a violent and deeply divisive controversy that tore the empire apart for over a century, from roughly 726 to 843. The emperors who championed iconoclasm, starting with Leo III the Isaurian, may have been motivated by the string of military disasters the empire had suffered. They saw the relentless advance of Islam, a faith that strictly forbade religious imagery, and wondered if God was punishing the empire for its idolatry. In 726, after a volcanic eruption near Constantinople, Leo took it as a sign of divine wrath and began to speak out publicly against icons. The defenders of icons, known as iconophiles or iconodules, fought back with theological arguments. Their central point was the incarnation. Since God had become a man in the form of Jesus Christ, he had made the divine visible. Therefore, he could be depicted in an image. To deny the possibility of a Christian image, they argued, was to deny that Christ had truly been human. The fight was bitter and deeply personal, splitting families and communities. Ultimately, the icons would win. And just as a woman, Theodora, had saved Justinian's throne centuries earlier, it was two women who saved the icons. In 787, Empress Irene, ruling as regent for her young son, convened the Second Council of Nicaea. With representatives from the Pope in Rome present, this council condemned iconoclasm and officially restored the veneration of images. After a second, shorter wave of iconoclasm was initiated by Emperor Leo V in 814. It was another empress, also named Theodora, who, after the death of her iconoclast husband, restored them for good in 843. This final victory is still celebrated every year in the Eastern Orthodox Church as the triumph of orthodoxy. This internal struggle, however, had massive external consequences. It was far more than a debate about art. It was a catalyst that shattered the remaining political unity of the Christian world. The popes in Rome were staunchly pro-icon. When the Byzantine emperors declared icons heretical and began persecuting their defenders, it created a massive and irreparable rift with the papacy. The Pope could no longer look to the heretic emperor in Constantinople for protection or political legitimacy. This crisis pushed the papacy to seek a new protector, the powerful Frankish kingdom to the north. This new alliance culminated in one of the most pivotal moments of the Middle Ages. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Pope Leo III crowned the Frankish king Charlemagne as Roman emperor in Rome. To the Byzantines, who saw themselves as the one and only true Roman Empire, this was an outrageous act of political usurpation. The creation of a rival Roman Empire in the West made the eventual Great Schism between the two churches almost inevitable. Chapter 5. The Macedonian Renaissance, a Golden Age. With the iconoclast controversy finally settled in 843, Byzantium entered a new Golden Age. Under the rule of the Macedonian dynasty, founded by the peasant-turned emperor Basil the Faunce in 867, the empire experienced a remarkable revival that lasted for nearly 2 centuries. This period, from the late 9th to the early 11th centuries, is known as the Macedonian Renaissance. It was an era of military strength, economic prosperity, and a dazzling cultural flourishing. In Constantinople, there was a renewed passion for classical Greek learning. The University of Constantinople became a hub of intellectual activity, where scholars painstakingly copied and preserved the great works of ancient philosophers, poets, and historians. Plato, Homer, Thucydides, saving countless texts from being lost to time. While the term Renaissance might imply a rebirth of radical new ideas, the Macedonian Renaissance was fundamentally conservative in its genius. Its primary focus was on the systematic organization and preservation of the classical and early Christian past. This was an age of encyclopedism. The scholar-emperor Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitos, whose name means born in the purple, personally compiled massive works on court ceremonies, imperial administration, foreign policy, and military affairs, codifying the knowledge of the Byzantine state for future generations. In this, Byzantium acted as the great library of the classical world during the period often called Europe's Dark Ages. Art, freed from the constraints of iconoclasm, blossomed anew. Churches were once again filled with magnificent mosaics and frescoes. These new works, while following traditional religious themes, showed a new naturalism, grace, and emotional depth, a classical influence that created a style that would later inspire Italian artists like Giotto and Cimabue at the dawn of the Italian Renaissance. This was the empire at its medieval peak. Its armies, led by brilliant generals and emperors like Basil II, had crushed the Bulgarians and pushed back its enemies in the east. Its missionaries had spread Orthodox Christianity and Byzantine culture north to the Slavs and the Rus, laying the foundations for modern Russia. Constantinople was, without question, the largest, wealthiest, and most civilized city in Christendom, the undisputed center of a powerful and confident empire. Chapter 6. The Great Betrayal. For centuries, the two great branches of Christianity, the Greek-speaking East, centered in Constantinople, and the Latin-speaking West, centered in Rome, had been drifting apart. They had different languages, different political realities, and, crucially, different ways of thinking about the Church. In the year 1054, That long, slow drift became a formal, permanent rupture. This was the Great Schism. The immediate cause was a dispute between the powerful and reformist Pope Leo IX in Rome and the equally proud and unyielding Patriarch Michael Cerularius of Constantinople. Papal legates were sent to the Byzantine capital to assert Rome's authority. Arguments flared over theology and church practice. Finally, on a hot July day, the Pope's chief legate, Cardinal Humbert, marched into the Hagia Sophia during the afternoon service and placed a bull of excommunication on the main altar. The Patriarch responded in kind, excommunicating the legates in a synod a few days later. The split was official. The issues ran far deeper than a clash of personalities. At the heart of the conflict was the Pope's claim to have universal jurisdiction over the entire Church, a form of centralized monarchy. The East rejected this, seeing the Pope as merely the first among equals in a college of patriarchs. There were also cultural and liturgical differences that had festered for centuries, such as whether priests could marry or what kind of bread, leavened or unleavened, should be used in communion. And then there was a single Latin word that the West had added to the Nicene Creed, the fundamental statement of Christian faith, filioque, meaning "and the Son." This clause stated that the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father and the Son. To the East, this was an unauthorized heretical alteration of the original creed that diminished the unique role of God the Father. Though the break was formal, friendly relations did continue for a time. But the schism had poisoned the well, and that poison would have deadly consequences when a new phenomenon exploded out of the West: the Crusades. The story of the Crusades' involvement with Byzantium began, ironically, with a Byzantine request for aid. In the 1090 S, Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, facing the relentless advance of the Seljuk Turks in Anatolia, asked Pope Urban II for a small contingent of Western mercenary knights to help him push them back. What he got was something else entirely: a massive armed pilgrimage, tens of thousands strong, fired with religious zeal and determined to free the holy city of Jerusalem from Muslim control. The First Crusade was a military success, but it created a deep-seated mistrust between the Crusaders and the Byzantines. The Byzantines expected the Crusaders to act as their mercenaries and return conquered lands to the empire. The Crusaders, seeing the Byzantines as treacherous and effeminate Greeks, instead carved out their own independent kingdoms in the Holy Land. This cultural alienation and political mistrust festered over the next century. And then came the Fourth Crusade. The Fourth Crusade is one of history's most tragic and bizarre stories of greed, political manipulation, and unintended consequences. It was called by Pope Innocent III in 1298, with the goal of attacking Muslim-held Egypt, the heart of their power. But it never got there. The Crusader army couldn't pay the enormous fee they owed to the Venetians for building and provisioning their fleet. Deep in debt and stranded in Venice, they were persuaded by the shrewd and ancient Venetian doge, Enrico Dandolo, to first attack the Christian city of Zara on the Dalmatian coast to pay off their bill. While wintering in Zara, the Crusaders were approached by a young Byzantine prince, Alexios Angelos, who had been exiled from Constantinople. He made them an offer they couldn't refuse: help him and his blinded, imprisoned father take the throne, and he would pay off the Crusaders' entire debt to Venice, provide them with an army to continue to the Holy Land, and, most temptingly, submit the entire Orthodox Church to the Pope's authority. And so the Crusader army, meant to fight Muslims in the Holy Land, diverted to the greatest Christian city in the world. They successfully put the young Alexios on the throne, but he soon discovered he couldn't possibly deliver on his wild promises. The imperial treasury was empty. Tensions between the foreign Latin army and the local Greek population boiled over into violence. Alexios was overthrown and murdered by a rival Byzantine faction. Faced with the murder of their benefactor and with no way to get paid or continue their crusade, the leaders of the Fourth Crusade made a fateful decision. In April 1204, they did the unthinkable. They attacked, captured, and brutally sacked Constantinople. For 3 days, the Christian army pillaged the Christian city. They smashed altars, stole countless holy relics, melted down ancient bronze statues for coin, and desecrated the Hagia Sophia itself, placing a prostitute on the patriarch's throne. It was a frenzy of greed and violence that horrified even the Pope who had launched the crusade. The sack of 1204 was not a random accident. It was the catastrophic culmination of over 150 years of escalating religious animosity and cultural alienation. The Crusaders were attacking a city they had come to see as alien and heretical, the capital of a rival empire, not a brother in faith. The Byzantine Empire was shattered, its lands divided up between the Venetians and the Crusaders, who established a Latin empire in its place. It was, as one historian wrote, an irrevocable blow from which Byzantium would never truly recover. Chapter 7. The Long Twilight and the Final Stand. The Byzantine eagle was not yet dead. In 1261, a small force of Byzantine exiles from their government in exile, the Empire of Nicaea, managed to sneak into Constantinople and recapture the city, driving out the last Latin emperor. The Paleologan dynasty was restored to the throne of a reborn Byzantine Empire. But the empire they inherited was a ghost, a pale shadow of its former self. The sack of 1204 had hollowed it out. The restored empire was impoverished, small, and surrounded by powerful enemies. Worse still, the Paleologan emperors spent much of their precious energy and resources fighting each other in a series of ruinous civil wars. These internal conflicts bled the state dry and allowed its enemies, especially the rising Serbian Empire in the Balkans and the new power in Anatolia, the Ottoman Turks, to pick off its remaining territories one by one. By the early 15th century, the once mighty Roman Empire was reduced to little more than the city of Constantinople itself, a few islands in the Aegean, and a semi-autonomous province in southern Greece known as the Despotate of the Morea. It was effectively a client state of the Ottoman Empire, paying tribute to survive. Its emperors made desperate trips to the west, begging for aid. They even agreed to formally unite the Orthodox and Catholic churches at the Council of Florence in 1439, hoping a crusade would be sent to save them. But it was too little, too late. The Byzantine people, bitterly remembering the betrayal of 1204, rejected the union, famously declaring, "Better the Sultan's turban than the cardinal's hat." In 1451, a new Ottoman Sultan came to the throne. He was just 21 years old, but he was brilliant, ambitious, and obsessed with one singular goal: the conquest of Constantinople. His name was Mehmed II. He prepared for his great enterprise meticulously. In 1452, he built a massive fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus, directly opposite one built by his ancestor. These twin forts, Rumeli Hisarü and Anadolu Hisarü, gave him complete control of the strait, cutting the city off from any potential aid from the Black Sea. He assembled a massive army of some 80,000 men, including his elite Janissary infantry, and a huge fleet to blockade the city by sea. And he commissioned a Hungarian engineer named Urban to build him the largest cannons the world had ever seen. Bronze monsters that could hurl 600-pound stone balls over a mile, designed specifically to smash the city's legendary walls. Facing this overwhelming onslaught was the last Roman emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos. His army was pitifully small, perhaps 7,000 men in total, including about 2,000 foreign volunteers, to defend 14 miles of walls. He was a tragic figure, a capable and brave emperor with no real empire, a man destined to preside over the final act of a 1,500-year-old drama. The siege began on April 6, 1453. For 55 days, the city held out. The great Theodosian walls, which had protected Constantinople for 1,000 years, were pounded relentlessly by Mehmed's superguns. The defenders, led personally by the emperor and a brave Genoese soldier of fortune named Giovanni Giustiniani, fought with desperate courage, working through the night to repair the breaches in the walls. Mehmed, growing frustrated with the slow progress, pulled off a move of strategic genius. He ordered his engineers to construct a road of greased logs across the peninsula of Galata. Then, under the cover of darkness, he had his smaller warships dragged overland, bypassing the great iron chain that protected the Golden Horn Harbor. His fleet was now inside the city's weakest naval defenses. The psychological blow to the defenders was immense. They were now completely surrounded, with no hope of relief. In the final hours, as the Ottomans prepared their final all-out assault, Constantine XI led the people of Constantinople, Latins and Greeks, nobles and commoners, united at last in their shared doom, in one last Christian service in the Hagia Sophia. Then he rode out to the walls to meet his fate. The final assault began in the early hours of May 29th. Wave after wave of Ottoman troops threw themselves at the battered walls. The defenders held them back for hours, but then disaster struck. Justiniani, the charismatic commander of the defense, was mortally wounded by a cannonball fragment. His evacuation from the walls caused a panic among his Genoese troops. At almost the same moment, Ottoman soldiers discovered that a small gate in the walls, the Kirka Porta, had been left unlocked or was breached. The elite Janissaries poured through. The defenses collapsed. Emperor Constantine XI, the 88th Roman emperor since Constantine the Great and the last of the Caesars, reportedly threw off his imperial purple regalia and charged into the sea of invaders, dying anonymously with his soldiers. The city fell. The Roman Empire was over. Conclusion and legacy. The fall of Constantinople on May 29, 1453, was more than the fall of a city. It was the end of an era. It was the final definitive end of the Roman Empire, a state whose history stretched back nearly 1,500 years to the age of Augustus. The aftermath was a mixture of tragedy and transformation. The great city, once the queen of cities, became the capital of a new and powerful force on the world stage, the Ottoman Empire. The Hagia Sophia, the heart of Orthodox Christendom for a millennium, was converted into a mosque. But the legacy of Byzantium is not one of failure. It is a legacy of incredible endurance and profound, lasting influence. For 1,000 years, it acted as a shield, a buffer state that absorbed the blows of invaders from the east, protecting the nascent and fragile kingdoms of Western Europe while they developed. It was the great library of the Middle Ages. Its scholars and scribes meticulously preserved the philosophy, science, and literature of ancient Greece and Rome. The works of Plato, Aristotle, Homer, and Thucydides, texts that, when carried west by fleeing scholars after 1453, helped to fuel the intellectual fires of the Italian Renaissance. And perhaps its greatest legacy is one of faith. The Byzantine Empire shaped Eastern Orthodox Christianity, a faith that remains central to the culture and identity of tens of millions of people today in Greece, the Balkans, and, most notably, Russia. The rulers of Moscow would come to see themselves as the heirs to Byzantium's spiritual mantle, declaring their city the Third Rome. The Byzantine Empire may be long gone, its walls crumbled and its name almost forgotten by many. But its echo, in our laws, our art, our architecture, and our faith, is all around us. A ghost empire still shaping our world from the shadows of history. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the rise and fall of the Byzantine Empire. Please subscribe to our channel for more stories from the annals of history. Until next time.